Thank you for joining us on the Going Deeper podcast, a ministry of Fathom Church in Littleton, Colorado. You will never get to the bottom of the depths that are in Christ for you. And our hope with this podcast is that it will help you go deeper with God. So let's dive into this episode of the Going Deeper podcast. What's up, everyone? This is your host, Kyle Knight, and welcome to the Going Deeper podcast, a podcast where we have conversations, hopefully to help you go deeper in your relationship with God. I'm in the podcast studio with our very own missions and events minister, Karina Bost. Hello, Karina.
Hello.
And our lead pastor, Chris Martin. Hello, Chris.
Hey, what's going on?
What's going on? Well, what's going on is, if you can tell by the title of this episode, this is a big one. This is a
hot topic.
Hot topic, a very trending topic, especially nowadays. We're gonna talk about pronouns. Pronouns. Chris, why are we talking about pronouns?
Why are we talking
seriously,
about this?
Chris? Why are we talking? Why do we?
Well,
why do we need to talk about this?
This is a good question. So we've talked a little bit here at Fathom about human sexuality. We've defined that. I preached a sermon specifically 2 years ago about transgendered identities and kind of talking about the modern trans movement and a biblical worldview about that. And so why don't we link to that sermon in the show notes, just in case we've got some folks who haven't heard that. Mm-hmm. But that sermon, I think, was I actually just recently went back and listened to it again because I think it did a good job of giving kind of a survey overview of both the movement itself, and some of those stats are maybe even out of date now because this thing is rapidly developing, but also kind of the biblical worldview around sexuality and gender. And just a basic summation, we believe that the Bible teaches that when we are born, we are sexed individuals. That means that our biology, as shown when we are birthed from our mothers, is the sex we are, and that gender, the social construct of gender, is to be aligned with our sexed biology. So we believe that that's the biblical view, and then discipling people is encouraging people to live more and more into the way that God created them to be. Now, that is not to say that we handle people who have gender dysphoria or other gender issues with harshness, or we said at the end of that sermon that we need to be ones who are convictional and compassionate. That conviction and compassion need to be held together, and that's our biblical conviction is that your sex is based on your biology, and that is who you are. And that we want to be very compassionate with people who have been affected by a whole number of different things. So I bring all of that up because I didn't even talk about pronouns in that sermon.
Right.
And really, in I think the last year to 18 months, this has become more and more and more a thing. It was around back then, even 2 years ago, there were some conversations about pronouns, but it's become more prevalent. Obviously, you if you're on social media, you can now identify what your pronouns are. We are hearing more and more that certain workplaces are requiring people to profess which pronouns they prefer. Again, it's not just now you are choosing what your gender is culturally. Now we are being asked to choose what our preferred pronouns are. And I'm starting to get some rub from people who are saying, should we be doing that? Should we resist that? Like, what is the Christian response to the whole pronoun game? Should we call people by preferred pronouns or not? Should we resist when asked, what is your preferred pronoun? Or is that something that we should let go and acquiesce culturally to it? These are some big topics. And so it's a little subset conversation in the larger conversation about human sexuality and specifically the transgender movement.
Yeah, I think thank you for kind of prefacing all this with that. And we will link to that sermon below. Yeah. So I feel like there's kind of two big questions. There's more to talk about, but I think the big ones is should Christians kind of follow suit with this? Like, should Christians be listing their and I hate saying this whole like listing thing, because it really is like when we say listing, that's more of I feel like that's more like an online social media sort of thing on whatever your profile is, that's what people are talking about when it's listing there. But I think we can that's kind of a blanket statement of people also like saying it and requesting that kind of stuff. So I think our two big questions are like, should Christians kind of follow suit in listing or saying their preferred pronouns? And then I think it's on the flip side is as Christians, how do we address people who are asking for other people and ourselves to call them by a different pronoun? Is that right? That's kind of like I feel like that's kind of the two big buckets that Christians are kind of.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, why don't we start with the second question?
Yeah.
Because I think the second question is one that has a different nuance to it that we should address.
Mm-hmm.
So Karina, let me ask you first, what's your first response to that thought? I mean, we can process this. Like, we're working through this. This is a live conversation. Yeah. And frankly, we reserve the right to say something and then come back on here in a couple months and be like, actually, we've thought and processed in community some more, and maybe we disagree with ourselves. Let's give ourselves some charity and grace in this, because it's a live topic. Yeah. But what are your initial thoughts when thinking about, hey, I Chris, identify with they, them pronouns. Would you please start referring to me as they, them instead of he, him? What's your response from a Christian worldview?
Yeah, I think in my research and my looking around and kind of investigating this, I discovered there's kind of two different camps that people can land on within the church on this subject. And one is this spirit of generosity and kind of honoring them in that sense. And the other was the spirit of truthfulness, and like, in truth, we speak to them. And so the more I researched and the more I looked, the more I realized, wow, that both of these are kind of biblical concepts that we can like draw things from the Bible and pull out truths from. And that the answer wasn't as clearly cut and defined as I initially thought.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. Because, and I've talked about the idea of pronoun hospitality before. That's that charity. That's that, being almost like missional and being missionaries and being honoring at some level people. That's one piece of this conversation. And you can make a case for it. You can make a case for it to say, hey, what's the big deal? You're honoring this person. And also, you could actually position yourself to have an ongoing relationship with a person by honoring them. Right. And in some ways, people will point to passages like in 1 Corinthians where Paul says, I have become all things to all people that I might win some, and just kind of say, okay, this is me being culturally engaging with someone who is not a Christian, with the hopes of winning them over to the gospel. I can understand, even if that may not be my position, I can understand that as a reasonable position with some biblical backing.
Yeah. And just to speak on that, like, I agree with that too, that it's like, there's so much in scripture that talks about how we are called to be, loving your neighbors and being respectful. Chris, I think you even talked about this. This always goes back to, for me, I always remember, like COVID stuff when we started. I think you were talking about masks and people's choice to wear mask or whatever like that, where it was like, that their choice, like, we're going to still like love each other with grace, like through whatever they decide. And so I feel like that's one side of it. That's a hard part, because we are called to be respectful and kind, do things out of gentleness and respect, and not harshly, not out of anger or anything like that. And so I could definitely see that part. And like, that's like, I fall into that side. I kind of honestly sometimes go back and forth with this, is that I fall into that going, you know what, I'm going to be loving and kind for this person. And then I think it, what also falls into that for me is it always kind of brings up like pick your battles sort of thing of like, if you're a Christian, like, is that like the hill you want to die on? Do you want to like get into an argument or debate or something like that with somebody else, fracture a relationship or something like that over something like that? And I think some people decide one way or the other, like, nah, it's not that big of a deal. So yeah. I'm going to just, whatever they would like, I'm going to show them love in that, even though I might disagree with that. I'm going to show them love in that because maybe I just don't want it to be a big deal. And whether that's, again, whether you're right, we're just kind of talking through this, whether that's right or wrong, I don't know. But I fall into that sometimes too. And it's like, you know what, I'm just not going to, like, I'm not going to fight this battle right now. I'm going to love this person through that.
Right.
And so like, that's my side of that piece of it.
But then it's complicated.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because while we would say, and I've said this multiple times, don't ever be surprised when the world acts worldly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Don't ever be surprised when pagans act like pagans.
Mm-hmm.
And we are also called to bear witness to the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Right. And so I just thought Ephesians 4:25 says, therefore, having put away all falsehood, let each one of you speak the truth with his neighbor, for we are members of one another.
Mm-hmm.
So at the same time, we want to be clear that we don't believe this ideology. Now we have to agree that that's the baseline that we're setting at.
Yeah.
I'm just assuming that we are at the baseline where we're saying, yeah, you are actually, your sex does inform your gender. So that's the baseline. But we are called to be bearers of truth. And in some ways, when you use other pronouns, even in a respectful way, you are in some ways speaking not truths at that point. If what you truly convictionally believe is that that is incongruent with how God created things to work, then in some ways you're standing some lies up. So I don't know, how are you wrestling with that side of this, Karina?
Yeah, I felt and kind of back to what Kyle was saying, I feel like the loving side falls more on the truth telling. Because I think if the second greatest commandment is to love others, the one of the greatest way we can love them is in truth. And that goes back to like in parenting, just because we love our just because we love our kids when we're parenting, it doesn't mean we just constantly agree with them. It means that we have to stand there and be like, no, this is wrong. Like you were wrong. And I kind of came up with this thought. I was just kind of trying to compare it to something else. So I kind of thought, like, if you were an alcoholic and you were just like, that's what you are and you're okay with it. And I, as a Christian, and you're like, hey, I'm an alcoholic and they're wasted or whatever. And they're like, give me another beer. I kind of compared it to that. Like, would I want to give them another beer? Is it loving to give them another drink just because they're okay with it? So I kind of fell in, like, my line of thinking kind of fell in that direction on that side.
Yeah. I agree with that too. I was also thinking of, and Chris, you said it, like, if we are, if we are in love, accepting of someone of what they want to be called, and we're like, you know what, like, okay, we will call you by that pronoun, whatever it is. In a sense, it's like, okay, well then, is that, like, are we endorsing like that sin? Like, is that something that we're saying like, hey, that's okay? And it also got me thinking of, like, man, that would be like, if somebody's struggling with pornography and we're like, hey, you know what? Like, that's okay. And like, and almost like affirming that in them, but being like, not really speaking truth to them. Like, that's not right. That's not how we are called to live. And so like, that's a tough one. And I want to read a scripture too. And this was from Isaiah 5:20. It says, woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. So it's like, man, woe to those who are like saying something that is evil is good. And I feel like that's the really hard part about this is like, and if we're kind of accepting this and trying to be loving and going along with what this person wants to be called, when we know it goes against what how God created us, and it goes against truth. It's like, are we kind of affirming that in them and endorsing it and saying like, that's okay. Like that's a totally okay. And I am saying to you, like, sure, I'll go along with that sin and like, and not call that out as in truth, in love, like Karina said, like lovingly calling that out. That's why this conversation is super difficult.
Yeah. So guys, where I'm at today is I've gone back to that transgendered sermon and said conviction and compassion. One without the other is wrong.
Yeah.
So if we went all conviction, it's truth telling, right? It's no, I will not call you by those pronouns because that's not who you are. Blunt, full stop, period. That's conviction. Compassion is, sure, I'll call you whatever you want just because that's how you feel. And I want to be cautious of your feelings, period. No truth. That's compassion. Both of those together is truth in love, right? This is what Christ calls us to do. And that balance is hard. So here's what I would say where I'm at. And I heard another guy talk about the idea of starting and ending the conversation with no. No, I don't believe that those pronouns are indicative of who God has made you. And then expanding into the conversation, not trying to convince them, but working through that relationally, but being really clear where you stand convictionally and also pursuing a relationship in that, in the same breath. So again, this comes back to nuance, but I think this is not necessarily a game to play on Facebook. It's not necessarily a game to play in the comments section on an Instagram post. This isn't the game to play as you're watching a YouTube video and scrolling through the list of inflammatory comments. I think this is we're talking about in relationship with another human being. If they want you to call them by a different set of pronouns, I think you need to be clear about your conviction and very, very sensitive with compassion in the relationship that you are in. One workaround is that you could use their name. And so I've read about this and heard about this, that like, it is not a lie to use. I mean, anybody can change their name to anything legally. So if they've changed their name, like you can call them whatever the legal, that's not a lie technically. That still feels a little weird to me. It's clumsy. It feels a little wooden to me. I don't know exactly how that works, but I feel like a Christian response should probably be a combination of conviction and compassion. I would, if to err firm on either edge makes me uncomfortable, but I'll tell you, I'm leaning more on the conviction side than the compassion side on this one, just personally. And it's because I read this quote from this radical feminist, a radical progressive feminist named Kara Dancy. I'm not sure if that's how you say her name, but she's not a Christian, to my knowledge. She's a radical progressive feminist who is anti the trans movement. She is not pro-trans because she believes it is setting back feminism, setting back women's rights significantly, which when males identifying as females are winning championships in collegiate sports and getting jobs and winning Women of the Year awards, it is setting back the pro-woman feminist agenda. Like the good part of feminism is being set back significantly. And this gal says this quote. She says, ideology is spread through, quote, polite lies. Ideology is spread through polite lies. Through just, hey, we want to be polite, we want to be careful, we don't want to offend people, and so we'll just use those pronouns. What's the big deal? The big deal is that it's not just an individual moment that's happening right there. It is, in fact, a pushing forward of an ideology that I believe is not biblical, that I believe is not what's best for human flourishing, and that I believe is against the way that God has set up creation to work. Therefore, I am leaning today more in the camp of being convictional while still being compassionate, but I would probably, in most circumstances, try to avoid using preferred pronouns, even if they are requested by somebody.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I'm landing today, in that compassion conviction side. I feel like I'm wrestling back and forth, and I feel like this is a live topic. So again, I say church, if you're listening to this, we expect some grace too, because
we'll re-record tomorrow.
Yeah, I mean, we can. This is a live topic. We're growing too in our understanding of this, but that's where I land today. I wonder, Karina, how you feel about that statement that I just made.
Yeah, I think that's kind of where I landed in all of this, in the direction that if you come across this, I mean, some of us might come across it more often than others, depending on where you work and all that. But if you come across this situation, I have to believe God put this person in your life for a reason. And like, we are called to be, Jesus said, like he was said that he was a friend of sinners. And so that means that we can pursue these relationships with people in love. And that, you know, if we're winning people for Christ, it means we have to develop relationships with them. And it's that, I think if you, I think I'm with you on a little bit more on the conviction side, but with full love, because I think if you even start just saying, yeah, we'll start here and I'll address you as you want, but then you're leading them to Christ, you kind of flip the switch. And like all of a sudden now it's like, well, now you're a Christian and God will transform you, but whatever, it feels like kind of like you're like bait and switch kind of. But yeah, I feel like pursuing those relationships in love and just seeking God in prayer and guidance as you move forward in those relationships is super important. And knowing like, yeah, it's hard work and it's uncomfortable, but that's why we're here, is to win lost souls for Christ.
Yeah, I would agree with you too. I want to mention one thing. You both I think you both really talked about relationships. And I mean, I feel like at the heart of this is building a relationship with people. And that's what we are called to do. But this might seem like and we kind of went over a little bit, Pastor Chris, but So I think that's good for if we know someone, if we'll know them for a little bit longer, if they're, you know, if like a family member, a friend of a friend or something like that, and building those relationships, building that trust, that love, that truth, like all that kind of stuff. In my head, I still kind of think of like, what about the times when it's like a quick thing? And I know we talked about like, well, it's on social media or that. I'm not talking about that stuff, but like, face to face, I feel like a lot of the anger, the really heavily weighed one side or the other, don't come with those building relationships. It's that quick little, like, so like you meet someone on the street or something like that, and you say he, and they quickly snap at you and say something else. And it's like, it's kind of a weird question, but like, what should we do in those situations? Like, if it's somebody that, you know, yeah, you might see them again, but if you're like, yeah, I probably won't ever see this person again, is that like an easy, just like, okay, I'm just going to like, let it go. Like, what do we do with those quick little things? Yeah, that's not a relationship.
I mean, my sense is we give ourselves grace. I mean, I've never been snapped at, but there have been moments where I have been maybe at a restaurant or at a store shopping or something, and you know, the sales rep or the waiter or something like that is obviously in a position of transitioning. I don't mean that offensively. I just, you know, you can, at some level you can tell. I'm going to do my best to just avoid having a moment. I'm not going to say yes, ma'am, thank you, ma'am. I'm also not going to be belligerent. You know, like, so I don't think I need to make an ideological case for where I stand. If I'm at Chili's and my, you know, the server is somebody who is transitioning, like, it's, first of all, what's the point? Like, what do you do? I mean, that's just
Chili's.
It's Chili's, but it's just, that's the same as like getting crazy on a Facebook post, in my opinion, in my estimation. Okay. So that's how I would do that. The real interesting piece to me is the second question that we haven't even touched on.
Oh yeah.
Which is, and we don't have a ton of time, but what about when you are asked by an employer? I mean, I don't know if this is happening too widespread, but it is in some, maybe government jobs, maybe schools and things like that, where, I mean, we got public school teachers in our church who, you know, what if they have to on, you know, the new rule of a public school system is in the first class of your school, of your school year, you have to get up there and you say, hi, my name is Professor, you know, Chris, my preferred pronouns are he, him. Like, do you say yes to being able to do that? Do you have the ability to say, no, I don't want to do that? Is this the time where you start to make a stand? Is this the time where you maybe lose your job? What happens if our government begins to require this? I mean, there's already multiple gender choices on passports, et-cetera. What if there's preferred pronouns that you have to begin to check a box to? So what if there are penalties for that? I mean, it becomes more complex when the question becomes, if it starts to be forced upon us, at what level are we going to stand and fight? And at what level are we going to back off and just kind of, and hear me, I don't know the answer to that. Right. Because there's a lot of nuances, because this is a live topic, because this is playing out, because wisdom is needed, discernment is needed. There is a certain level where we use our citizenship as a bargaining chip. We see Paul do that often in the book of Acts. We also see him, let go of certain rights as a citizen at times. And so I think there are some things that maybe are permissible, other things that aren't. This is really, really tricky stuff. Yeah. This is why being constantly in God's word, being constantly in prayer, being surrounded with a good Christian community, a Bible believing church, a place where you can process and discern with wise counsel what the right move is. Because I think the man on the street moment is that feels to me more of a moot point. The relationship thing with somebody that's a neighbor or a coworker or a friend or a family member, that's a more important. I mean, talk about putting a risky piece on that. What about a family member? Do you start addressing them with their pronouns that they ask for? What about the risk of losing that relationship? And that's a live topic for many in our church. Trust me, I've been in those conversations. But then what happens when it starts to encroach upon you and you don't want to push that ideology forward, but now it's required of you? Gosh, this is a topic that we will be talking about in future podcasts, because I don't think it's going to go away. I don't know. I don't know. Any other thoughts you have, Karina?
No, I mean, that's just a hard one to process for the same reason, because on one hand, it feels like I am a girl, so you can say what I mean, you can declare what you are, but then you're moving that conversation forward. And so,
it's true. You're speaking the truth, right. But it's those polite lies. It's, I know what I'm actually saying is a much larger, broader context.
And same thing from my perspective. When you said that, Chris, I was like, well, okay, that's an easy thing. Like if I'm asked that, I feel like that's an easy, I'm going to tell you the truth, and I'm a male, and you can call me dude or he or whatever. But it's like, then it's like, okay, well then am I just kind of, that's super hard. And then when it comes to like, hey, you have to do this, that to me, it feels wrong if you're made to.
But we would be ignorant if we didn't think that was coming.
Oh yeah.
We would be ignorant if we didn't think that those conversations, if not, they haven't already started, sure they aren't coming for every avenue of society. Right. So this is where we need to be prayerful. This is where we need to be rooted in God's word. This is where we really do need his discernment and wisdom. Because we do want to be compassionate and we do want to do all things to try and win some to Christ. And we have to be those who stand on the word, stand in the truth, stand in the light, bearers of the good news. And we have to call sin. Welcome to the paradox and difficulty of following Jesus. It's always been this way. This is just the newest topic.
Yeah. And I think it's important to give yourself grace, because I mean, I just feel like just even thinking about it, it's like, oh, I know I would say the wrong thing and then I would screw everything up. And and it's just like give yourself grace and love as well through all this. I mean, that was a good conversation.
Good one.
Any last little bits on pronouns?
I'm done.
We are done with this conversation, and we will most likely talk about it again in a little bit. Thank you guys for having this conversation. Church, again, check out that trending sermon that we did a couple of years ago down below. And if you have any questions about this, reach out to us, please. But we love you, church. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.